Hi 8th graders, this is Mrs. McFarland again, and now we are on the last lesson in Module 1, Lesson 5. So let's get started by looking at the I can statement. I can determine congruence by performing or describing a sequence of transformations that maps one figure onto another. So remember, transformations is an overarching term for the different transformations that you learn: translations, reflections, and rotations. And so you're going to think about that while you're looking at this Spark Your Learning. Maribel wants to make a quilt like this one. She has quilt pieces that are triangles. So here, this blue, for example, is a triangle, and then also some parallelograms like this red one. Describe ways she can transform the shapes to match the pattern in the quilt. So will she translate? Will she rotate? What will she do to make that, to match the pattern in the quilt? So spend a few minutes, pause the video, and go ahead and work on that. So I hope you spent a little bit of time doing the Spark Your Learning, and let's look at the build understanding. Maribel needs to cut shapes out of fabric to prepare for a different quilt. Trace figure 1 on a piece of paper and cut it out. Lay your cutout on top of figure 1 to make sure it is the same size and shape. And let's look down here really quickly at this connected vocabulary box. The word congruent, it tells you that figures that are congruent are the same size and shape, so that's important. So let's go to A, figure with transformations, experiment with transformations to move the cutout shape on top of figure 2. So you're going to move it, transform it somehow using those different transformations you know to map it to figure 2. What transformations did you use? Explain how the figures are the same and how they are different. And then B says experiment again with transformations to move the cutout shape over figures 3 and 4. So you're going to do from 1 to 3 and then from 1 to 4. What transformations did you have to use to do that? And then C, what do you notice when you compare figure 1 to figures 3 and 4? So what do you notice there? And then D, a figure is congruent to another figure if and only if a series of rotations, reflections, and translations can map one onto the other. Which figures are congruent? So which figures are the same size and shape? So go ahead and work on that. Pause the video before you move on to the Step It Out, and then we'll look at that one. So here we are in Step It Out. Number 2, while preparing fabric for quilting, Maribel lays a grid over her fabric. She wants to cut out 5 congruent triangles. She draws the triangles on the coordinate grid below. So you can kind of see what she's done here. She has A, B, C, D, and E. A says that triangle A is translated 2 units down. So she's going to go down and then reflect it across the y-axis. So she's going to reflect A, once she moves it down, over the y-axis. Which triangle is the image of this sequence of transformations? So that's A. B says, are the 2 triangles congruent? And explain how you know. And remember that from the definition on the last page. Which 2 transformations can you perform on triangle B to show that it is congruent to triangle D? So what are you going to do there to show that those 2 triangles are congruent? And then the last question, D, record the vertices of triangle A and triangle B. Use mapping notation. Remember from they started in lesson 2, 1.2 with translations. They drew a table or made a table to show the different vertices of the corners of those different shapes. They want you to do this mapping notation to show how the vertices of triangle A changed and became triangle B. And then read the mapping notation aloud to your mom or another person. Explain how you know the shapes are congruent. So that's what you'll do for D. So if you need to go back and review that mapping notation, you can do that. So pause there and do number 2, and then we'll move on to number 3. So in number 3, it says Maribel wants to cut a new shape. She will reflect the figure A here across the x-axis. So this time she's going across the x-axis here, so it's going to come down here somewhere. And translate the image 5 units left. So she's going to reflect and then translate to the left. She claims that the order in which she performs the transformations matters. Is she correct? So that's an interesting thought. Think about that. Reflect figure A across the x-axis, then translate the figure 5 units left and draw the final image. Now they're going to ask you to reverse the order of the transformations and draw the image again. How did the order you performed the transformations change the final image, if it did? So answer that question. So then B, the vertices of figure B, so now they're going to ask you to use these vertices here to make another figure. They have these coordinates. B has those coordinates. Figure B is rotated 90 degrees clockwise about the origin and then reflected across the x-axis to form figure C. Figure B is also reflected across the x-axis and then rotated 90 degrees clockwise about the origin to form figure D. So they want you to do those things and then complete the table. How did the order you performed the transformations on the figure change the final images, figures C and D? So that's kind of it'll take a while, so make sure you pause and do that before you go on to the check understanding. When you're ready, start the check understanding and see how you do, and then you can move on, if you feel confident, to the next page. So this next 2 pages are on your own. Those you do on your own. And once you're finished, you can go on to the next section. This next page, these next 2 pages are the homework. And again, this is similar to the on your own. So if you feel like you need more practice, you can do this. But the on your own is pretty long this time. So if you feel like you've done enough, then go ahead and you can skip that page, the homework. But I would recommend that you do the test prep and the spiral review. And then on the next couple pages, there's a review of the module. So at the end of each module, there will be a review, couple pages. They'll review the vocabulary for the module. They'll do the concepts and skills. It's a really good idea to do this review each time at the end of the module and just see how you're doing. If you need more practice, you can go back and look at any of the sections within the module to see, to review that if this doesn't go so well, but I'm sure it will. So make sure you do the review each time, and then we'll see you in module 2.